We have a special second speaker. Tonight's session is sponsored by the Circle at St. Peter and Paul Parish, and our host is Marie Schimmelfinning. So Marie, I want to turn things over to you now.
Thank you. You don't see my name on the screen because Rosemary Inslee invited me to her house to be with you tonight. So anyway, welcome to all of you today. Thank you for coming to this third, I believe, deep dive that SNL is putting on. And this one is sponsored by the St. Peter Jesuit Parish, our SNL Circle. What we're doing tonight is something we haven't done in the last ones anyway. What we're going to do is to have a personal story that Cesar Quiera is going to give us. Cesar is a software engineer from El Salvador and who with his family is seeking asylum right now in the United States. And then we're going to listen to a presentation by Melanie Goldberg, who is an immigration attorney, and she's going to give us the story about immigration laws past and present, the complications that all people seeking asylum must deal with their anxieties and the experiences that they encounter, along with unwelcoming U.S. regulations and delays that we do have. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Cesar. Cesar is, as I said, from El Salvador. He arrived in the United States with his wife, Carmen Luna, in 2016. They are now a family of 4 with the 2 little ones, who are just precious if you saw them, Cedric and Camille. They're applying, as I said, for asylum. And Cesar's wife, Carmen, has a degree as a food engineer. And as I said, Cesar is a software engineer. Thank you, Cesar, for being present with us tonight and giving us your story.
Hi, everyone. Could you hear me?
Yes, we can, Cesar.
Oh, okay. As I say, thank you for the introduction. There is Carmen and Cedric, and here is the little one, Camilo. And we came from El Salvador. As you could see, it's really far away from here. It's in Central of America, and only for give you an interesting point, we could put my country 7 times on Michigan. And if you compare the population, it's close to the same for a little one space. They asked me to talk about 2 points in a specific about what we decide to come here to the United States and what are the changes, the challenge, and all the difficulties what we had during this process, talking about the asylum process. And sorry, the short answer for that is we fleeing violence and extortion, looking for a better place to can live and growing up our children's without suffering all those difficulties what we had in our life. And for give you a more deep details about my country, during this period between 1980, 1992, we had a really bad civil war. More than 75,000 people was killed, and most of the 80% was a civil person without nothing to do with the war. And more than the 8,000 was missing. And as you know, Monsignor Romero was killed during that time, and that put more pressure in the people to start to fight against the corruption and against all the bad things. And then um, as you know, the Jesuit fathers were killed in a university in El Salvador, and that was in that period of time. But after that was the post-war, and we got a really hard time about corruption and the gangs growing up really fast during that period, because the government did not invest too much money to keep that under control. They didn't give the chance to all these people involved in the war to be re, uh, they didn't give a chance to come back to work like normally. They didn't give chance to get to the normal life, and all these people take the easy way, and that made more harder the time in El Salvador, and as consequence was a really hard economy
Just at the end.
and a lot of poverty. If you cannot hear me, please let me know. Okay, and as I said, all these stuff create a really bad environmental about insecurity and extortion, poverty, and is a high cost of living, and the lack of decent opportunities in El Salvador, and I dare to say in Central of America, in so many places in Mexico. That's the main reason why a lot of people is leaving their country, because nobody leave their homes because they want. They leaving because they need to find a better place for them and for their loved ones. The challenge and the difficulties what we had during all this process is, I could separate that in two scopes. It's like the first one, the emotional, um, is really stressful. It's really stressful because we know, coming from a country as mine, a country as El Salvador is not as enough reason to you to apply a asylum, because I don't know why, but they say it's not enough reason. But and that's why we are really stressful, because we don't know that day, but any day they could say, okay, you need to come back to your country. And as you hear, that's not an option. Other challenge is the new language. Thanks to God, I speak a little bit of English, as you could hear, but it's really hard. I'm really blessed because a member of Jesu, Pat Han, she worked for the where the priest at the I don't know the name, but she worked with the priest, and she spent like 2 hours the last 2 years teaching us English to me and my wife, and that's a really blessing for us. It's Pat Han. And another is like, you could see in the media in a lot place, the rejection to the immigrants, and that's something in some point affect you, because you are not welcome from the is the perception from the institution who run this country, but I know it's not the feeling in the American hearts, because I know a lot of people like you are really involved to be welcoming, and people like you who spend a lot of time working for us, and I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate your time to be here tonight. Um, and as I say, nobody leaves their home because they want to. They they want a better place to live. They want a better place to raise their child, and I think that's fair. um, and the economic way is like, um, I cannot imagine how all other people, immigrants as me, can handle all these expenses, like car insurance, like rent a house, pay the bills, and pay taxes, and all the expenses. Uh, because even for me, with some knowledges, it's really hard. It's really hard, and I don't know how they do that, how they are doing, but it's a hard time. And as you know, a lot of us, we don't have a insurance. I have insurance, but my wife doesn't have one. And for this reason, um, we don't think our asylum process we will went through, because um, come from, as I say, a country with height of violence and extortion is not enough reason. I know Melanie will talk about that late, and it's really hard. And for that reason, we are looking for another way to get a green card. Like, the other alternative for us is a work visa. If I could find a employer who could give me a sponsor visa, but right now that is really hard. It's getting difficult, and even a lot requirements, a lot expenses around immigration are increasing, and that's more that put more pressure on us. Um, I hope this give you a better idea uh, what is my history, and I really apologize for if you cannot understand me very well, but thank you for having me, and if you have a question, I will really glad to answer to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cesar, for your history, your story, and for giving it to us with such great heart. And know that we are with you all the way, and we will continue to be that way. I would like to now to introduce Melanie Goldberg, who will perhaps bring us more light into the works and the problems that Cesar is going through, and so many of our immigrants. Melanie has been practicing immigration law in the Detroit area for more than 20 years. She has worked in the private sector and worked with many of mentors, and worked also in the nonprofit sector. Melanie is actively involved with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Michigan chapter, and much of her involvement has focused on advocacy. A New York Law School graduate, she admitted to practice in Michigan and in New York. Melanie enjoys educating on immigration issues by presenting to community groups and anyone who will listen. And we definitely are here this evening to listen to Melanie. Before law school, she earned a master's in teaching, and she was recently ordained as an interfaith minister. Melanie, please, it is all yours, and thank you for saying yes.
And I'm just going to interject here. This is Rosemary. if somebody has a question from Cesar, or for Cesar or for Melanie, if you use your chat function and just type it in, and then we'll have time after Melanie speaks to take questions.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you, Cesar, for sharing. We will talk about Cesar and his quest for status in the United States as we go along. Oops. Oh, what happened? There we go. So unless you're 100% Native American, I like to remind people that everyone in the United States, other than those Native Americans, do have an immigration story. Sometimes those stories are people who immigrated willingly, and sometimes stories of people who immigrated unwillingly. And as we look at mostly the people who have immigrated by will of their own, their history has not changed throughout the years. They've immigrated to be reunited with family, to be for financial means or needs, fleeing a bad situation, seeking freedom, and seeking the ability to pursue their own faith. So in every wave, and we'll see through history that there are waves of immigration, there's ebbs and flows, and in each period of ebbing and flowing, we have a push and a pull factor. So this looks like it might be a family who immigrated from Ireland, and I would say that the push factor, pushing them out of Ireland, we say emigrating, that's with an E, out of Ireland, was probably a potato famine. They were not able to feed their family. They come to the United States for a better life, and so their children will fare and they'll be able to eat. The pull factor at that point in time was the ability for newcomers to come to the United States and rent a small apartment and get a job and be able to feed their family and then maybe grow and improve their situation over time. Then there are periods of time where we have become restrictionist. In the 1890s was the first immigration restrictionist law, and that was the Chinese Exclusion Act. At that point in time, there were too many Chinese. We had invited them to come to the United States, specifically to the West Coast, where they were used to work in the gold mines and building railroads. And then they began to prosper because of the good work they were doing, and people decided that we no longer wanted them here. So there's a very famous case in immigration law where there were Chinese coming to the United States on a ship, and they got here, and the law restricting their admission happened while they were in the waters heading to the United States shores. And when they got here, they were not allowed in. And so what we say about immigration is that, or history, is that it repeats itself, and that's one of the things that's wrong with history. So where did we see a plane load of people coming to the United States, landing, and while during that time they were in the air, President Trump had signed an executive order banning their admission into the United States. Even though they had legal papers to come, they were no longer invited in. So this has happened over time. These are some of the highlights of how this just displays how this is not our first trip to the rodeo as far as being a xenophobic country excluding immigrants. In 1776, the only people who were allowed to naturalize, that means apply to become a U.S. citizen, were those free white persons with good character living in the U.S. for 2 years. Then in 1880 was the Chinese Exclusion Act. Like I said, that was the first restrictionist act. In 1891, there was an act barring polygamists, sick or diseased. And then in 1907, there was a restriction on Japanese immigrants. 1917, World War I created xenophobia. Immigration from most Asian countries was halted. In 1924, there was an act that favored immigrants from Northern and Western European countries. That means immigration from Southern, Central, and Eastern Europe, including Italy, was limited. And as a result, illegal immigration increases because every time you impose laws that restrict something that's a natural tendency of people to do, to migrate to a place where they are going to be able to live their best life, you create a situation where they're going to do it anyways. And that's why illegal immigration increases. And we see that now, or we did before the pandemic. So a story, I went to a storytelling event and the stories were all based on immigration. And this gentleman is, you know, about my age now, and he grew up with his grandparents were Italian from Southern Italy. And you know, a few years ago, he says, yeah, I've never been. So he had reached out to some of his cousins and family members in Italy and decided that this would be a really good thing to do. So he went on vacation. He had a nice 3-week stretch, and he was able to go and really go and live with them and get the feel of their little village where, you know, everybody would get up in the morning and go to the piazza and have coffee and then talk, and then they'd go home and work in their little gentleman farms or whatever because nobody had real work to do. And then in the evening they go back to the piazza and have wine and talk to their friends. And it's like, what a lovely life this is. And how, you know, and he got angry. Why did his grandparents deprive him of knowing these cousins and this family and this lifestyle? How nice it would have been to go spend summers in Italy. And then he went for a tour to the Tenement Museum in New York. And the Tenement Museum, if you've never been, when things are possible again, I suggest that you go. It was amazing. And he heard a story about this family, this couple who had immigrated to the United States. And because they immigrated during this time of restriction, they came without papers. They could never go back home to Italy to visit their family because they had no papers. So if they left, they couldn't return. He then, it clicked in his mind, that must have been my grandparents, because that's right around the time his grandparents had come to the United States. So it wasn't because they didn't want to share it with them, it was because they couldn't. And I have clients right now who are, it's an Amish family from Mexico. And, you know, the father, he does use a phone. They're moderate Amish, I guess. But he called and he said, you know, his mother or father had just died, and, you know, the children wanted to go to the funeral. But because their case has been pending now for, I don't know, 10 years, I think, or 8 years maybe, because the courts administratively closed the case. And I told him, I said, you know, if you leave to go, you can't come back. So because their case is still in limbo. Anyways, moving on. We were welcoming Mexican agricultural workers in 1942 all the way to 1964. Because what happened during that time? World War II. And we had lost a lot of young men because they were off fighting in Europe in World War II. And so at that point, we were happy to have these Mexican agricultural workers. In 1952, there was another exclusion of Asian immigrants. The exclusion of Asian immigrants ends, excuse me. In 60 to 62, we brought in 14,000 unaccompanied Cuban children. In 65, the quota system, which favored immigrants from certain countries, replaced preference categories. Now we have kind of a combination of the two. There was a Reagan amnesty. We've never had such an amnesty again. So the last one was 1986, and 34 years ago. 2001, the first DREAM Act was introduced by Durbin and Hatch in Congress, and we are still waiting for a solid, real DREAM Act to be passed and signed into law, and we will talk about what has happened in the last 3.5, almost 4 years as we move forward. So why do people come to the border, to our southern border in droves? People migrate. Migration, and so people are migrating. It's not just the United States where they're coming to our borders. If you look around the world, the people from Syria migrating through Turkey and Greece and through Europe and Hungary closing its borders, and other European countries just saying, nope, our borders are closed, we're not accepting anymore. So this is just such a tumultuous time. Not just here in the United States. Everybody, so many people have just such a very closed vision. This is happening around the world. Things are bad. People are looking for better lives. People are looking for safety. So who lives in the United States? We have citizens, lawful permanent residents, sometimes known as people who hold green cards, refugees and asylees, temporary protected status, that's determined by the administration. They decide that certain people, because from countries where there's been a natural disaster or there's been some great government civil violence, or uprisings, that those people who are already here in the United States, and maybe they were here temporarily, maybe they were here as a student or just as a visitor, but something happened in their home country that prevents them from being able to go back, such as when there were the hurricanes in Haiti, and we then granted temporary protected status to Haitians. And so those people who were already here could stay and get permission to work, and they could even leave and come back. I had a client then who volunteered his time to go back to Haiti and help work and help clean up the country, but he was allowed to come back. We have deferred action, which existed before DACA. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival. So deferred action would be given to somebody who was ordered deported but couldn't for some reason. Either there was huge fires in the country and all the documents, all the birth documents were burned, and for some reason the government cannot prove that this person belongs to that country, or the country is not willing to accept that person back. They're given deferred action and actually they get permission to legally work in the United States while things are getting worked out. So what DACA was deferred action for childhood arrival. And what does that deferred action refer to? They are deferring deportation. So DACA is never, ever meant to be a permanent solution. DACA is only a temporary fix that Obama was able to do by executive order, and it's now the ability for the Trump administration to cancel it is still in litigation, and they're still struggling. And the Supreme Court only said that they couldn't, that it couldn't be canceled now because the reasons were not good enough. So you know that the administration is going back to come up with better reasons to cancel it, and so we're we're waiting right now. They are rejecting any new applications going in. They are still accepting renewal applications, but they're going to be making changes in the program, because right now an application will give somebody permission to work legally in the United States for up to 2 years. They're done in 2-year cycles. Now it's going to be reduced to 1 year. And then there are all the people who are here on temporary visas, and then we have the undocumented. So, so whether somebody is here as an immigrant or a non-immigrant depends on their intent. There are people who come to the United States with a specific purpose, a specific period of time, and they know they're going home. So I do visas for performing groups, usually folk musicians from Hungary and different European countries. And they are coming here, they've got a specific tour lined up, they're going to perform, they're going to be at this camp and teach, and then they're going home. And so those, and then we have the immigrants, and they are the people who intend to make the United States their home permanently, and maybe one day become a citizen. So these are all the non-immigrants that we have. Anyways, you can see some of the more common are the visitors, the people who come to the United States for business or pleasure, family coming to go to Disney World, the students, the F student visa. We have J exchange students, a lot of residents in the hospitals who are from other countries doing their residency here will be on this cultural J exchange. Au pairs, and a lot of the exchange students who you see at summer camps. Those are often here on J visas. Then the P's are the performers, O's, those are often the sports guy, the Swedish hockey player on the Red Wings and such. Are religious workers, and then we have the victims of trafficking and the snitch visa, which is somebody who helps the government corral or arrest somebody. And then there are still those 5 that haven't been assigned, the N, W, X, Y, and Z. So we'll see what happens to those one day. But so of course, all of those visas are only, good when you can travel to the United States. And right now, during the time of COVID, all bets are off. So these are in 2017, these were the 20 metropolitan areas with the largest number of immigrants in 2000, and Detroit being one of them. But you'll see Detroit is a smaller bubble, so maybe 1 million. So for Michigan, these were the demographics in 2017. There were 704,000 foreign born, half of which had already been naturalized as citizens. 130,000 are undocumented, maybe more or less. And the top countries in Michigan were India, Mexico, China, Canada, Lebanon, and Korea, and these are all percentages of how many were here. So interesting to see that India is actually at least on par with Mexico. Immigrating is not easy. Families wait years to be reunited, and so many members will never be able to immigrate to the United States. There are not enough visas, particularly for low-skill workers, and immigration is expensive. Some people just can't afford the fees. And it's getting more and more expensive, and in fact, there's going to be another increase in fees in October, and there's a whole to-do about USCIS because they're going to the government now asking for money, and they're saying that they may have to furlough off 1/3 of their employees. So roads to legal permanent residence, we have employment, family, asylum, refugee, diversity visa. So why don't they just get in line, you ask, right? It's a long line and even longer for some people. This is the roadmap of how to get a green card. Lots of roadblocks, lots of turnbacks. You don't belong here. And you might follow the path all the way to here and then, sorry, Charlie. So for family-based immigration, which our administration had called chain migration and thought it was a terrible thing because Melania Trump's parents were able to immigrate and become US citizens. We have these categories. So these are the preference categories. We have immediate relative, who is the spouse or minor child or parent of a US citizen. We have the adult unmarried children of US citizens, spouses and minor children of somebody with a green card, the adult unmarried child of somebody with a green card, and the married child of a US citizen or siblings of a US citizen. And these are the only people who can migrate based on family relationship. No aunts, no uncles, no grandparents. No. So how long do they wait? This was back in February. I didn't update it, but it's probably pretty accurate time-wise anyways. So we have these countries that are separated out: Philippines, Mexico, India, and China. And so if you're looking at this, so for instance, can I go back here? So F3, married child of a US citizen. If that married child of a US citizen is from Mexico, they have been waiting and they come to me now. So the US citizen comes to me and says, I'm a citizen now, my married daughter is in Mexico and I would like to petition for her. I'm gonna look here and say, that's 24 years. So these months don't march along like the months in the calendar. So I need to add another 50%. So I'm telling this person that, you know what, if you file the paperwork today for your married daughter, it's gonna be about 36 years before she gets to the front of the line. So that's not so good. F2A, we can look back at the F2A because the C means that they're current, so they really don't have a waiting time. So the spouse and minor children of somebody with a green card are really being treated the same at that point as immediate relatives, the spouse or minor children of the US citizen, minus the parents. So they're in good shape, and so that means that they, as well as the immediate relatives, only need to wait that 10 to 12 months it takes to process their applications. And of course, in the time of COVID, many applications are being processed very slowly, and so that's kind of the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, and everybody else is somewhere in between. So processing times are up. The USCIS processing times increased. Now this is during this current administration. Processing times have increased by about 46%. There's been a decline in filings. These are the highest fees that have ever been paid. The US citizen spouse was waiting. So this again was 6 months ago when I put this slide together, but a US citizen spouse who files her green card application, her or his, it would be waiting a year, and now it's even longer because there were layoffs and USCIS was just not working as much during COVID like the rest of us. A US employer waiting for his employee to get a green card. It was waiting up to 2.5 years or 2.25 years. Naturalization, that's an application for citizenship. You're going to wait about 12.5 months or longer. And for a long time, people had been approved for citizenship, but then they couldn't attend an oath ceremony. So actually in Detroit right now, they decided that that was one thing that they could do, was reopen and do these oath ceremonies on a drive-through basis. So they basically had the judge standing in the parking lot, and people are driving up and doing their swearing in the parking lot. And a victim of crime is waiting for about 4.5 years, during which time they have no possibility of work authorization. So we have many immigrant-founded companies in the United States, and I'm guessing that you can recognize most or all of these. And not all of these companies are built by immigrants who came to the United States with the idea that they were coming to the United States to start a company. They may have immigrated on family basis and then they started a company. They may have come in as a student and then were able to work for another company and get their legal status, their permanent legal status in the United States, and they started this company. Or it could be the child of an immigrant who started this company. So we have the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11/2001, what had been called the Immigration and Naturalization Service, was then separated into 3 agencies: USCIS, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Customs and Border Patrol. And so USCIS, I used to call them the nice guys. They adjudicate applications for people who are applying for citizenship or applying for permanent residence, and many applications start with them. Right now, they've given USCIS permission to start deportation actions and all kinds of nasty things. The gatekeepers, that's Customs and Border Patrol. They're the ones that you see at the Ambassador Bridge in the tunnel when you're coming back to the United States. Their jurisdiction is 100 miles from any international border. And because our lakes are all connected, and part of them are the other side is Canada, and that means all of Michigan is under Customs and Border Patrol. So not only do we have Customs and Border Patrol who are patrolling our streets looking for undocumented immigrants or people who they want to deport, but we have ICE, and I call those the innkeepers and travel agents, because they are the ones who arrest and detain people and arrange for their travel back home. So, and I'm just looking at the time that we're getting to the point where I need to speed up a little bit. So ICE operates the largest detention program in the United States, and there were 52,722 detained on September 10th, even though they're budgeted for 45,000 any one night. Now, during times of COVID, there's an effort to release as many people as they can, because it's just not safe to have people detained, but it's a struggle. ACLU has just gotten a lawsuit trying to get bond hearing, and they will be able to have bond hearings, but only for those who have medical conditions that make it particularly dangerous for them to be detained. 70% were detained in 2018. They detained 500,000 during the year, and that was 20 times the amount from 1979. And the average length of time of detention was 30 days. 70% were detained in privately owned facilities. So this is the average quota through the years. In 2010, you can see how the budget has pretty much almost not quite doubled, but deportation and detention. People can be deported if they violate immigration laws. Before 1986, the number of deportations rarely exceeded 2,000. During the Obama years, there were about 400,000 per year. And from January to September in 2017, which was from the time Trump had sworn in, till 2017, they deported nearly 54,000 immigrants from the interior. That means not border, not turning them back at the border. And that was a 34% increase over the same period the year before. So who's lobbying in DC? All those private corporations who own detention facilities. You can see the Corrections Corporation of America is the red group, the blue line. And yeah, they're spending a lot of money trying to get those detention beds filled because it's a lot of money. And the counties, so in Michigan, our detainees are detained in county jails who have contracts with the federal government. The county jails are happy to have those detainees there because they got like $100 a night per detainee. So that's a huge cash cow for them, and they don't have to work so hard arresting their own people. So refugee is determined outside the United States, and an asylee is in the United States, has come here maybe with a visitor visa, maybe they're just approaching the border. All of that is legal entry, approaching the border, saying, I have a fear of returning to my home country, let me apply for asylum. So overseas, a refugee is determined by the UN whether they're a refugee. They go through multiple screenings, medical, biometric. They're checked with 8 different institutions, all those background criminal checks, and then that can take 18 months or more, and even longer these days. Once approved, they're told where they will be settled. They have no choice. It's usually an area where because there are designated agencies who are funded to take care of refugees. And so they place them where there's an agency who has space and availability to help somebody, a new family coming in, but also where they may have family members already settled. So that's why you get enclaves of Chaldeans and Lebanese and people like that, because they're already here and everything's in place. So they sell their belongings then and prepare to travel, and then they have additional screening when they come to the United States. Resettlement agencies have to help with housing, furnishings, and food, and they get one-time payment of $1,000 for each refugee. Refugees are authorized to work legally once they land in the United States, and they are expected to become self-sufficient in 90 days. And that means learning a new way of life, a new language, a new job. And after 6 months, they have to begin paying back their airfare costs. And after 1 year, they have to apply for a green card. So the US received these are the sad numbers. So worldwide, there are like 20 million refugees, right? So in 2016, the United States says, we'll take 85,000 of them. So a country of our size and our wealth took 85,000. And then President Trump thought, well, that's way too many. So he's steadily decreased. And so that number in 2018 was 45,000. And less than half actually came to the United States. So I think that year we only got maybe 22,000. President Trump reduced that number to 30,000 in 2019. And in 2020, it was reduced to 18,000, which actually, because of COVID, is going to be less than half of that. So like I said, 20 million refugees worldwide, and 37 resettlement countries have resettled up 1% of those. So troubles around the world that we don't even hear about. Refugees to the United States in 2019, these are the countries they came from. The Democratic Republic of Congo, 47%. So of the 30,000 that we took, and Burma and Ukraine, those were the top 3 countries. And all the other countries, Eritrea and other countries, it was, you know, just like single digits. So this is surprising because, you know, you think refugees, you don't think Democratic Republic of Congo, in the Detroit area anyways, Burma and Ukraine. On the west side of the state, you will see there is an enclave of people from DRC. So another problem we have is the pending cases in immigration court. You can see this was from March 2019. Well, we are well over 1 million cases pending in immigration court. There are 400 some judges, and yeah, impossible. So not all of our undocumented are from south of the border. Sorry, this is kind of jumping around from topic to topic, but I always thought this was interesting here, that the highest growth in, so you can see 5% growth here, Honduras, India, and China from 2010 to 2016. These were the highest. So undocumented doesn't mean you snuck across the southern border. Undocumented means maybe you came here with a visa to work or to be a student or just as a visitor and decided, hey, United States is a nice place. Or you met somebody special and you decided not to leave, or whatever happened, life happens, and you decide not to leave. So you become undocumented because your documents expire. There were 50,000 undocumented Irish, and they were the only ones really who went to Congress and said, fix this for us, but they didn't. And so the sad story is they can't go back home because once you become undocumented, you can't leave the United States if you ever want to come back. Why? IRA. That's the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, and that's a long name, so we call it IRA. It was a law signed by President Clinton in 1996, and what this law said was, so there used to be a provision in the law, 245I, and that said, if you came to the United States with a legal visa, and even if it expired and you stayed longer than you were supposed to, and then you were offered the ability to get your green card through an employer or through a different family member or something, you know, you got to the front of the line for something that was filed for you long ago, whatever, you can apply for your green card here in the United States. You pay $1,000 penalty because you did the wrong thing by staying longer than you were supposed to. But instead of interrupting your work and your family life, we're going to let you stay and apply for the green card. Well, this IRA law took that away. And what it said instead is if you stay longer than 6 months past the time you were supposed to stay, you cannot come, and you leave the United States, you can't come back for 3 years. And if you stay in the United States for longer than a year than you're supposed to and you leave the United States, you can't come back for 10 years. And in order to waive that 3 or 10 year prevention of coming to back to the United States, you have to file a waiver application. And the waiver application has to be based on extreme and unusual hardship to certain members of your family, like your spouse or your children or your parents. And so that kind of means that your family member is so ill that they are on a ventilator and you're the only one who knows how to plug it in. It's a very, very high threshold to meet. So, so that's why we had, you know, there used to be on the southern border in particular was a revolving door. People would come in, they would work, they would leave, they would come in, they would work, they would leave. Well, not only did they do this, but they increased the enforcement at the southern border with this law. So you made it more dangerous for people to come in. And once they were here, if they were found out and they left, they couldn't come back. And so you created this one-way door. And that's when our undocumented population began to increase. So each deportation conducted by ICE would cost taxpayers an average of $11,000 in 2016. That's probably much more now. That includes detaining them and transporting them back to their country. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, so I talked about the refugees, but I didn't talk about the asylees. So the law for asylee is you have to be fleeing persecution, and the persecution has to be based on political beliefs, religious beliefs, you remember ethnicity, race, and membership in a social group. And that's very hard to define, and it's getting increasingly harder. It used to be that women who were victims of domestic violence could qualify as a social group, and they would be, you know, with the proper documentation showing that they had really suffered in their home country, they would qualify for asylum. So now the Attorney General has canceled that. So that's why economic reasons has never ever been a reason for being granted asylum in the United States. So just the fact that you can't you can't find a job or you can't make a decent living in your home country, that's not going to do it. Civil unrest, general civil unrest in the country, unless you are being targeted yourself for whatever the political leanings are, if you're in a political minority and you've stood up to the government and you've made statements and you've stood on your soapbox and you talked in public, and the government is pointing fingers at you saying you're a bad person, we're going to arrest you, that would be somebody who would qualify for asylum. So applying for asylum, coming to the United States and just saying in general, I'm afraid of gangs, I've been subject to domestic violence, it's just not going to do it these days. So I think, so anyways, this is, you know, I found this in a small book that was written by John F. Kennedy. And I think that, you know, as we move forward and hopefully with a new administration starting January, that we can go back to this, which just says immigration policy should be generous, it should be fair, it should be flexible, and with such a policy, we can turn to the world and to our own path with clean hands and a clear conscience, because honestly, right now, our country just has to be humble about the state we are right now. So these are some resources that I encourage you if you're interested in looking more. The immigrationpolicy.org just has information. TRAC, actually, the second one, they have some amazing information on lots of things. The IRS, all the federal agencies, Social Security, and things, and they have reports and besides immigration. And then AILA.org, there is an advocacy tab on that website. So if you ever want to take action, you can check out the advocacy tab. It's a member organization, but a lot of content is available to non-members, including that take action tab. So there's just so much that needs to be done. And I didn't even talk much about what Trump has done during his last 4 years, but I'd rather answer your questions. So if there are questions, and if there are none, then I'll keep talking.
Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead. Thank you so much, Melanie, again, for saying yes and giving us so much to think about, to ponder, and to pray over. And just to say that Rich is recording, this whole program tonight has been recorded and will one day be put on our website probably very soon, and we'll let you know when that happens, because there was so much for us to digest. I'm going to turn it over now to Rosemary, who's going to field our questions.
Good. So I think because there are so many of us, the best way to handle this is if you have a question, just put it into the chat. And I'm just wondering, Sister Karen, did you get the answer to your question? Yeah.
Let me see.
About, I think it was like the cost of bed per night.
Yes.
Detention.
Yeah,
That's the, yes.
yeah. The chart, Melanie, that you gave us, I think was 200 some. That's per night per
Yes.
immigrant. Thank
And
you.
that's average through the country. And so, you know, like I think, I don't know, when the yeah. So some places it's more, some places it's less, but that's on average.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question? Okay, I'll give Melanie a few more minutes, and if something comes to mind, just put it in the chat, and then I'll let Melanie know.
Great. So the first thing that we had when Trump became president, you know, the first executive action he signed was the so-called Muslim ban. And, you know, under this administration, and it's not just, you know, it's not just him, but it's the people that he's put in place in these different offices. So the Attorney Generals, the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, the Assistant Secretary of, you know, of USCIS and ICE. And so all those people are increasing, and the chief judge in immigration court. All of those people are just each person is more anti-immigrant than the last. So let's see.
So we do
Ella,
have
I don't see your questions.
we do have a couple. Ella,
Okay.
Ella, you need to address your questions to the whole group. I did not see them.
Okay, and then I see that Paloma is asking, feels like an asylee has a steep curve to climb in a very short time once in the USA. What's the success rate? So depends. If they are represented, they have a better success rate, and it depends on the immigration court they end up in. On the success rate at the asylum offices. So if somebody comes into the United States legally with a visa, they're here as a student or whatever, and then something bad happens and they say, I can't go back home, I fear, and their fear is based on one of those 5 things I said, they can make an application. It's called, that's an administrative affirmative application. They go to the asylum office for an interview. And the grant rate at the asylum offices traditionally, typically, is a little better than if they end up in immigration court and they're filing a defensive application, which means they're fighting deportation. And then if they're in immigration court, it depends on the court. If they have, you know, I think New York courts, there's close to maybe a 50% grant rate. If they end up in Atlanta, Georgia, in the immigration court there, I think there's maybe a 3% grant rate. Detroit, I think, is probably about 20% grant. granting applications for asylum. So it really depends. So actually, when somebody would come to me and say, you know, I've got my case now in immigration court, I would first ask them, do you have any close family members or you know, any relatives or close friends in New York or California, because you're going to have a much better chance of getting approved there, and let's try and get you moved. So that's a little bit about that. If an individual is deported, what happens to the rest of the family? It depends. So if, you know, if the mother is, if there's a mother who's undocumented, who's deported, and she has a child who was born in the United States, it's up to her. Is she going to take the child or find somebody to take care of the child here? It's Sophie's choice. What do? It depends on how dangerous you think it might be in your home country. The government's not going to tell the U.S. citizen child that they have to leave with the mother. But, you know, what are you going to do? So no, any family that has the legal right to remain in the United States does not have to leave. And there are lots of cases where husbands and fathers are deported and their families stay behind. Sometimes the family will stay behind because after 10 years, the person will be able to apply again. So sometimes they decide to stay in the United States, but if it's a Mexican family or Mexican gentleman who gets deported, the family might decide to live on the border in Texas and, you know, go across the border and stay in the United States though, but go closer to where they can have weekend visits in Mexico where the father is. I mean, it's sad, it's terrible, but it's the way it is. What happened? Okay. What happened to sponsoring immigrants? I mean, you can still sponsor somebody. Like I said, there are all those family members who can sponsor somebody. You can't sponsor a friend, but you can sponsor, you know, and the laws have certainly changed since the 40s and 50s. It used to be a lot easier to immigrate to the United States for some people. But like I said, there were all those restrictions, especially for the Southern and Eastern Europeans, because you know what? It all goes to racism too. Think about it. Southern, you know, Southern Italians, Southern Europeans, they're darker skinned. Yeah, they're not the, you know, not the same as Northern and Western Europeans. So that's part of it. Cesar, Joseph wants to know, were you facing extortion in your barrio?
Well, Cesar, do you want to answer that?
Yeah. In my country with my wife, we had a little one startup about environmental and social work, and we was working with some kids in really dangerous area, and that's why we really get involved in this kind of extortion, because we live in a safety place, but we want to work with a lot these kids who live in a really dangerous place, and we play some projects, and in that period of time we face this kind of extortion. Yeah.
Thank you, Cesar. I think we've got one more question.
Yep,
for
there's
Melanie.
two more actually.
Okay.
So the U.S. immigration policy into the U.S., but yeah, I don't know how it's impacted Canada's immigration policy toward the U.S. Or from the U.S. to Canada. I know that at certain points in recent times, people have tried to go to Canada and claim asylum there, and that's been rejected. But I will tell you an interesting thing. Just a week or two ago, I have friends here who are dual citizens. The family, it's a mother, father, and their two children. and they are all Canadian and US citizens. So his mother still lives in Toronto, and they wanted to go check on her. And when they traveled from the United States to Canada over the Blue Water Bridge, they were asked on the Canadian side, they were detained for a couple of hours while they were asked very very detailed questions about what they were going to do, where they were going to be. While they were there, somebody called the house every day to check that they were still there. And they had to quarantine for two weeks, but I mean, they were there for less than 2 weeks. He stayed, she came back with the kids. When she came back across the US border, no questions. No questions. Where were you? What have you done? Nothing. I mean, on the way in, they were so careful with the COVID-related questions and inquiries. And on the way back, the United States asked nothing. So crazy. That doesn't have a lot to do with immigration policy. One immigration policy, actually, I will say, though, that the restriction on numbers of employment-based immigration visas that are given each year is a boon to Canada, because we have so few of these H-1B. These are visas given to people who have a 4-year college degree. Often it's in computer-related work or engineering, things technical like that, and a lot of companies will hire foreign-born people to come to the United States to work, and it takes a lot of money. It's a big investment to bring somebody, because there's huge costs in applying for their visa, and they have to pay them a living wage. I mean, they have to pay them a prevailing wage for that job. And we have such a restricted number of those visas each year. Every year they receive, like, in a normal year, again, nothing is normal this year, but in a normal year, like last year, they would receive 4 times the number of applications for the number of visas available for those jobs and for those visas. And so a lot of tech companies, including some moderate-sized companies in the Michigan, they will set up an office in Windsor because they know they can get the guy a Canadian visa to go work in the office in Windsor. Microsoft set up an office in Vancouver because they could get visas for people to come to Canada and work. So so here you have, both ends of the spectrum, something smaller, something bigger, and a lot in between who are doing the same. So who's benefiting? The Canadians. They're getting the tax money. They're getting, all the spending, and, people renting apartments, buying cars, buying, all that commerce and trade. So that's how our immigration policy has benefited Canada. Yes, serious attempts. Well, no, because our Congress can't do anything, because they are so split and there's not a majority anywhere. So that's why most of the actions taken recently have been executive actions, because Trump and his administration came in with an agenda, and their agenda was to restrict and reduce immigration. And Congress, there's not enough of a majority in the House. Trump's cronies are in the are in the minority, and in the Senate they're in the majority. And in order to get a law passed, you need to have both the House and the Senate. And since they can't agree on much of anything, really, nothing has passed, and they've tried. I mean, and they've tried. So then some people don't even want to try because they say, "Oh, we need a comprehensive package. We just need to clean up the whole thing," and that's not going to happen. So finally, you start picking at little things that you think might be able to get through, and you got some people on both sides of the aisle. So take, for instance, that DREAM Act. The DREAM Act was supposed to be a permanent solution for people who are in the place where they can apply for DACA now. Well, great. 20 years later, since the first one was introduced, and we still don't have a DREAM Act. Now, these are young people who came to the United States with their parents as babies, and now they're, now they're in legal limbo. They are not citizens. They can't ever become citizens. They can't even apply for a green card. And without the DACA program, which a lot of them don't even fit within the parameters to apply for DACA, they wouldn't have permission to work. They wouldn't be able to get a driver's license. They wouldn't be able to go to school. They wouldn't. So that, and through the years, there have been many, many introductions of the DREAM Act. And there's been bipartisan support and and support in both the House and the Senate. And it has never been able to pass. So that's one example, and so you ask about serious attempts to reform. If that can't pass, I don't know when we're going to see any serious reformation of immigration law.
So Melanie, we have time for like a brief final answer to that last question.
Yep. So nope. The answer is no. No, it's very complicated. There's no hope right now. I see hope maybe in January, but it's going to take a lot of time to undo what's been done, and it's going to depend on how the Supreme Court and how people read the decision in the Supreme Court about how Trump tried to undo DACA, and how easy it's going to be for future presidents to undo what's been done in this administration. So it's not easy to come. There are no loopholes, and in terms of easy or hard, I don't know, but I just know that without building even the physical wall, there's definitely been a legal wall that's been enhanced during this administration, but not only this administration, Obama's administration as well. This is not the word. I mean, it's been building up. So, and certainly since actually there was, I think the last really significant immigrant positive bill that was going to be signed was actually one that Bush was going to sign as on 9/11, and then the towers came down. That was the end of that. So
thank you so much, Melanie. That was just wonderful. Such a sweep of history, and your that in combination with your experience with individuals, it's really very, very helpful. Thank you. So I just want to, in ending tonight, say thank you to all of you from being here. And Kay Solfaro is just going to tell us about a couple of upcoming things.
Well, first of all, I would really like to thank Caesar for really telling us the story of the anxiety and the uncertainty that people have to live with during this time when he's waiting and hoping, and I think you won our hearts, Caesar. So if we can think of anything to help you along, I know we will. Well, now what I'd like to do is just to remind you, if you possibly received the notice, that we're excited that on August 25th, that's 2 weeks from now, we're having another Zoom session, and we're really excited that we're having Father Dave Versmeyer, who's going to be talking with us on Catholic social principles and Catholic social teaching. And it's especially pertinent now because our Pope, Francis, has asked us to really think about Catholic social principles, to really reach out to each other in kindness and understanding during this COVID time and during all of the turmoil around the world, to really build that Christian spirit in church that we need to. So Father Bursmeyer is very good with these principles, really sharing some principles that we may not realize we have, the things that we really say that we will live by, and to remind us that we really need to do that. So that's going to be Tuesday, August 25th. And then in the fall, we are moving in a slightly new direction. We've got a little basis for education and knowledge here, and we really want to reach out even more to the stories of people who come to us from these other Central American and Mexican country of Mexico. And one of the things that we're really excited about is that Sister Martha de la Torre and Amy Kentner, and I believe there is a third person as well whose name escapes me right now, but she has helped immigrant women form a support circle. And we would really like to share some of their experiences and ways that they are really building support with each other. So we think that's going to be a real exciting program. It's still in development. We really have to figure it all out. And then we're going to be having more stories of people who are DACA students, people who have TPS or temporary protective status in this country. And I know that some of them have lived here for a number of years, being protected and having been offered protection by the United States. And some of that presidents at any time can eliminate that comfortable opportunity. And then also families seeking asylum. We need to learn more about the complexities, the years they wait, the uncertainty that they experience, and ways that we may be able to that we may really be able to make these things known by more people and reach out to our congressmen and within our state and to in Washington. We really need to come to understand these people and their needs. So with that, I'd like to thank you all, and I think we did it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.